It is time for a new episode of the the Fight HQ podcast, MMA Report podcast, my other podcast. I'm here to break down UFC Noche goes down tomorrow. They're in Texas. Of course, Ryan, this episode solos. Pete's got some things going on. I have reached out to Pete about his picks. So if I get his picks during the show, I will get those out to you. So hopefully everyone is having a good time. Do apologize for no show last week. Sometimes life gets a little crazy, and that's what's been going on in my world. But as always, we appreciate everyone who tunes in for every episode of the Fight HQ podcast. Of course, if you do have any questions, you can line those up right now in the YouTube chat if you happen to be watching this episode live, or you want to hop right into our Discord channel. You can throw the questions. There's some questions already in that Discord channel, so I'll get to those as we do go on. And glad to be back talking a little mixed martial arts action and UFC Noche. Of course, you think about a year ago, UFC Noche was a very big deal for the UFC, and well, it's just a fight night card at this point because obviously the UFC has a lot of concerns about what's going on in Las Vegas with Canelo and Crawford. And of course, by the way, Pete's Patreon channel, you can subscribe to that. The link to that is in the description of this show. Of course, we'll have a DraftKings contest. We'll get the link to that in the show notes after the show is on. And, just kind of getting right into UFC Noche. And, as I was starting my breakdown of this fight card and kind of looking at some of these fights, and I'll tell you, man, there is one fight on this card that scares the absolute crap out of me in terms of rostering it, and it is Jose Daniel Medina and Dusko Todorovic. It is a fight that scares the living crap out of me because I don't trust either one of those guys. When we're talking about game theory, and speaking of game theory, to me, the main event is going to have to be a priority in your lineups. I understand that people may be looking at the value of Diego Lopez, but I'll tell you, I think Gene Silva is going to be a smash play for me tomorrow when I'm entering in all my DraftKings contest there. That to me is the main event is going to be a must roster for me. The co-main event, to me, and it's been kind of interesting watching the betting markets on that one because as the money has been coming in on David Martinez, to me, I look at that and I wonder if we're going to see the vet lesson happen for David Martinez in that matchup. If you've not seen the weigh-in results, one fighter did miss weight. That person was Kelvin Gastelum, missed weight by 5 pounds, weighing in 191 pounds. And, when I saw I guess apparently there was not any weigh-in stream, so I saw a clip on my X, and Gastelum steps up on the scale and he's just flexing the whole time. It was just like clearly he knew he wasn't going to make weight. He's been fined 35% of his purse. Well, that's going to be something we'll have to monitor tomorrow, around 2:00 Eastern time to see whether or not that fight is going to take place or it might get pulled, especially when he missed weight by that much. But I mean, Kelvin Gastelum, the price tag is pretty high on him, priced at $9,000 over on DraftKings. There's some other fighters that I'm very intrigued by. A fight that I feel like you're going to have to roster and you're not going to feel great about it is going to be the Zach Reese versus Cedric Dumas matchup. Dumas, I think everyone knows the story with him when it comes to outside of mixed martial arts, what's going on with him. Of course, the big story with him leading up to this fight is the fact of, revealing that I want to say $13.90 in his bank account and talking about the financial issues that he has there. And, Zach Reese, he came into the UFC as a guy primarily just known as he was a first round finisher, but 2 of his last 3 fights have gone to decision. That to me is going to be a fight that you're going to have to look at. The most expensive fighter is Tatiana Suarez on this card, and second most expensive fighter on this card. Costa's number 1 at 9,500, but Suarez at 9,400. I think that she's going to be able to get the takedowns at will, and so I think that's going to be something where she's going to be someone that I'm going to prioritize as well. But looking at just the salary ranges, the 9,000 range, Dusko Todorovic at 9,300 scares the living crap out of me. Jared Gordon could be the interesting play in the 9,000 range just because of what we've seen recently from him. 2 of his last 3 wins here coming via TKO and KO. But there are some underdogs that I think could be some interesting plays when I look in that 7,000 range. I mean, look, I'm not going to feel great about it, but you know what? I might take a shot on Jose Daniel Medina at 6,900. So that's, you know, just kind of some of my general thoughts there. If you do got any questions, line those up in chat. I'll get to those questions as we do go on. But of course, just kind of give a kind of brief breakdown on every fight here. Of course, you got Diego Lopez taking on Gian Silva. And when you look at the salaries for this one, Lopez at 7,000 on DK, Silva at 9,200, a minus 260 betting favorite, plus 210 is a comeback on Diego Lopez. Of course, last time we saw Diego Lopez was that loss against Volkanovski, where, you know, one of the things about that matchup with Diego Lopez is you just kind of feel like he didn't put the foot on the gas pedal. And if he would have done that earlier on the fight, does the fight go differently? I think my overall thought on Diego Lopez is he is going to be a guy that's going to last a long time in the UFC. He's going to be a very exciting fighter, but he's someone that I really sit back and really wonder is, you know, can he beat the upper echelon of this division? Can he beat the top 3, top 4 type guys in the division? Just because of, you know, I just look at, you know, when you go up against someone who has an overall skill set, that's my concerns with Diego Lopez. When you look at Silva and look at his last matchup, I was against him. And it was primarily because of, you know, the kind of the question marks of the grappling defense. And he answered every question in that matchup against Bryce Mitchell. And, you know, look, I understand that following last week, there may be people who want to get off the Fighting Nerds bandwagon. I totally understand it, and it is a bandwagon that here at Fight HQ, we have been firmly behind. Anyone out of the Fighting Nerds, we have fully backed here for the most part. And I think Silva is going to win this matchup. To me, he is a core play for me in terms of DFS. You know, from a betting aspect, I would probably be more looking at potentially looking him, you know, to win by decision. I think that's where you're going to get kind of the best prop lines out there. But I do like Gian Silva. I just think he's just a better fighter. I think he has more ways to win this matchup. I think he goes out there and gets the win. And it would not shock me if he goes out there and has a dynamic performance, whether it's a stoppage or it's a win by decision, that he may ultimately be next for Volkanovski here for the UFC featherweight title. Next up, we got Rob Font taking on David Martinez. David Martinez, a slight betting underdog here, but the markets have really been changing up on in terms of this fight. You know, now it's a pick'em fight. Early in the week when I initially started my sheet, Rob Font was a minus 130 betting favorite. Of course, both of these fighters were supposed to have different opponents on this fight card. Initially, David Martinez was going to take on Carlos Vieira, where Font was going to take on Raul Rosas Jr. And, you know, look, when you look at Rob Font and this bantamweight division, he is, you know, he's got that G word attached to his name at this point. He is a gatekeeper. And I look at David Martinez and I just kind of, I sit there and it's a big step up in competition. Yes, Rob Font is a journeyman. He's a gatekeeper. You know, he's going to be a top 10, top 15 type guy. But I just wonder, is this a little too much too early for David Martinez in terms of that one? I think Font's going to go out there and win this fight by decision. And looking at from the DFS perspective on when you look at the salaries here, Rob Font 8,500, David Martinez is 7,700. I would say this, like, I don't love the fantasy score upside of Rob Font in this one, but I would say that it is something that I would I'd be interested in rostering him depending on, you know, kind of what it is. David Martinez, I mean, I think taking my issues I have here, is this too quick, too fast for him? One of the thoughts I would say in terms of that is, you know, I can see the value play in terms of that one, but I would say this, I'll probably be more looking at this from the betting side and betting Rob Font to win via decision, which is at plus 130. Then you got Jared Gordon taking on 𝗏𝗲 Garcia. Gordon priced at 9,100 on DraftKings. 𝗏𝗲 Garcia is priced at 7,100. And, you know, 𝗏𝗲 Garcia got off to a rough start in the UFC, you know, going 2-3 in his first 5 UFC matchups. Then he's 3-1 in his last 4. And he has gone the distance in 4 of his last 5 matchups. And, you know, when you look at Jared Gordon, he's had 2 impressive wins here of note, going 2-1 in his last 3 matchups, where those 2 wins were both via first round TKO KO. And Jared Gordon has always kind of been a guy that I would say that I've I've really kind of more gone against than put him in my lineups. But, I do like the potential upside here for his fantasy score upside. With that knockout, what we've seen recently, I do lean Jared Gore. I do wonder, do we see 𝗲𝗄 Garcia kind of go with that BJJ game in terms of that one? Then you got Kelvin Gastelum and Dustin Stolfus. Gastelum, of course, mentioned a little while ago, missed weight by 5 pounds, weighing in at 191 pounds. He was fined 35% of his purse in terms of this one, taking on Dustin Stolfus. Kelvin Gastelum, minus 250 betting favorite, plus 200 for Dustin Stolfus. And, you remember the last fight with Kelvin Gastelum against Joe Piper, where it got off to a rough start. We had not seen Kelvin Gastelum get off to that kind of rough start in a very long time. And then he came back, and it was a matchup that, if it was going to be a 5-round fight, I think Kelvin Gastelum would have come back and won a 5-round decision, but it was only a 3-round matchup between those two guys. Of course, with Kelvin Gastelum, and I think it's something we always talk about him, is the fact of he has not finished a fight since 2017. That was against Michael Bisping. For Dustin Stolfus, look, his fights in the UFC, more times than not, do end via finish. 6 of those 9 fights have come via finish, whether wins or losses in the UFC. It's the weight miss is really the concern for me with Kelvin Gastelum, and the fact of he's not shown to be a finisher. That is the absolute concern that I have in rostering Kelvin Gastelum. To me, I'm not saying I'm Xing out Kelvin Gastelum in terms of putting him in lineups, but when I look at that 9,000 range, he might be the lowest in that 9,000 range for me, just because of the weight miss and the fact that he's not been a finisher. And, you just know if it was a 5-round fight, maybe you have a little bit different opinion on Kelvin Gastelum, saying, okay, he can rack up some points through 5 rounds, but it's only being a 3-round fight. Just don't love the price tag there on Kelvin Gastelum. Then you got Alexander Hernandez and Carlos Diego Ferreira. Of course, Alexander Hernandez coming off that win last month against Chase Hooper. He is the betting. It's a pick'em fight in terms of these two guys, both at minus 110. Alexander Hernandez is at 8,400. Diego Ferreira is at 7,800. The one concern I would say that I would have for for Diego Ferreira, let me start on that side of the equation, is when he has struggled in the UFC, typically it's been against grapplers. And I don't see Alexander Hernandez going out there and grappling him in terms of this one. I would expect that we see primarily a stand-up matchup between these two guys. But this is one where, I really like what we've seen out of Alexander Hernandez. The one thing would be a minor concern to me is the quick turnaround. And, when you look at kind of the body style that he had in his last matchup against Chase Hooper, now taking on Carlos Diego Ferreira, I don't mind the Carlos Diego Ferreira call in this one. The official picks are going to be Alexander Hernandez, but just have some concerns in terms of that one. One of the things to notice about Diego is the fact that this is the first time since 2021 that he fights 2 times in a calendar year. So we'll see. And of course, he was supposed to fight last month against King Green. That fight gets canceled during fight week in terms of that one. Next up, we got a matchup, which is, we have a couple young fighters on this fight card that are making their UFC debut. One of those is Santiago Luna taking on Kwang Lee. For Santiago, just turned 21 years old last month. And the one thing that really sticks out to me is I do wonder if he's starting in the UFC just too young. And it's primarily because of who he has competed against on the regional scene. Just as an example of that, his last matchup was Tough Enough, which is a regional promotion based in Las Vegas. His opponent was 4-6. And to me, I think that he may have been better suited going into Contender Series, because you just don't really love the strength of competition that he's had working his way up into the UFC. When you look at Lee, now he's a veteran, been in the UFC for some time, coming off the submission win back in May. Trains out of the academy in Minnesota. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that gym. That's a really good gym in Minnesota. Has a couple of UFC fighters in that gym. And when you're talking about looking for under 8,000 options this week, and I know one of the popular questions we always get is, who are those value plays underneath 8,000? And I think Lee is one of those value plays this week. And it's just because of, and I very well may look very stupid in terms of this, but I just wonder, is Santiago just in the UFC a little too soon in that one? That's why I like the underdog shot in Lee, price 7,900 as well. That will be the official pick for me. Then you got Todorovic and Medina. Todorovic is priced at 9,300, 6,900 for Medina. Dusko Todorovic, a minus 400 betting favorite. In terms of this one. And, when you look at both these guys, Medina 0-2 in the UFC, also lost on Dana White's Contender Series. Takedown defense has been an issue in 2 of his 3 UFC/Dana White Contender Series matchups. That, to me, is going to be concerning. Todorovic has lost 3 in a row. He's finished in the first round in 2 of those 3 fights. And, the one thing about 𝗲𝗁 is it's pretty poor competition in the UFC. And this is probably a fight that, from a DFS perspective, you're going to say, I want to roster this matchup. But I don't know how you have any confidence in either one of these guys, especially when you're going to have to pay $9,300 for 𝗲𝗁. And look, he may very well go out there and just steamroll Medina in the first round, and everything I'm saying is going to look stupid. But it's going to be a boom bust play. Sometimes we talk about that in heavyweight competition of, one fighter's likely going to go out there and score 100 points and the other fighter's going to be 10 points or less. And that's kind of my concern with this one. I think it's the boom bust play of the week. It is just, if you told me Todorovic was in a high 8,000 range, I'd probably have a little more confidence, but I just don't know how you can have confidence in either one of these guys with what we've seen in the UFC. I think Medina is going to be someone that I'm going to take a chance on in this one, but I think 𝗲𝗁 likely gets the job done. But man, it's just a fight that you don't trust either one of those fighters in that. Then you got Puellas and Joaquim Silva. Silva is the betting underdog at plus 100, minus 120 for Claudio, who's 8,200 on DK and 8,000 for Silva. So this is the Pete special of the week, the 8,200 and 8,000 matchup. Puellas, he had been on a nice little roll, had won 5 in a row, but then he's lost his last 2 fights, and really known for the knee bar submission. If your sports book has, an exact submission props, go look and see what his prop to win via knee bar submission is, just because of what we've seen him do in the past. One of the things about Silva, is the inactivity. We have not seen him since May of last year. So you're well over, a year and getting close to a year and a half since the last time he stepped into the UFC octagon, and just a very up and down fighter in terms of that. I like Claudio Puellas in this one. I mean, I think it's going to be a very close fight, but I think Puellas gets the job done. Suarez and Lemos, Tatiana Suarez, 9,400 DK. She's a 5-1 betting favorite. Lemos, 6,800 on DK. She is plus 350. And this is, I know one of the popular questions we get is, who's got that takedown upside? And to me, Tatiana Suarez is number 1 this week when you're talking about that takedown upside. I like the fact that it's a 3-round fight, not a 5-round fight. It is kind of, I will say this, and I talked about this on my other podcast this week, that it's kind of crazy that you've got basically a matchup of top 5 fighters in the division, and it is absolutely buried on the prelims. Just kind of very weird by the UFC to do that here. But, Suarez, we saw what happened against Wei Li earlier this year, but we all know what her takedown abilities are, and I think she's going to be able to take down Amanda Lemos at will. To me, the only fear is going to be is what if she doesn't get, a stoppage victory in the first round or second round. That to me would be the concern, but I think she takes Lemos down at ease. And, if you're looking and you're saying, you're trying to build a lineup with takedown artists, Tatiana Suarez has got to be right there at the top of the list. Andrew, appreciate the comment there. Says, always look forward to these. Hope you boys are okay. I know you are loving Ibuka. Who do you like for capping? Yeah, Mecca Ibuka, boy. Oof. He had a great game last week. That was fun to watch in Atlanta. Actually, I'll be heading to Houston on Sunday. So actually, kind of a rare for me during the football season. Be home on a Saturday. So looking forward to be able to sit on the couch tomorrow night and watch the UFC fights. Captain, I would say this, man. Tatiana Suarez, a fighter we were just talking about, because of that takedown upside, and look, it may only take her one takedown. And maybe she goes out there and submits Lemos pretty early on in this matchup. But to me, Tatiana Suarez at the captain spot is someone I look at. Look, Gian Silva is going to be very popular, and I think Tatiana Suarez is going to be very popular at the captain position. I think someone like a Zach Reese will be another interesting captain. We'll talk about him here in a moment in terms of that one. But that's kind of the ones I would sit there in terms of the captain's contest. If you got any questions, be sure to line those up right here in the YouTube chat, or you can do that on Discord. Mention then you got Jesus Aguilar taking on Luis. Luis a minus 225 betting favorite in this one, priced at 8,700 DK. Jesus Aguilar at 7,500. This is a matchup that you look at the Luis losing his UFC debut back in April. He is a guy that I do think has a good ceiling in the UFC. Jesus Aguilar, mentioned about coming off that loss there. 3 of his 5 UFC fights have ended in the opening round. Luis is a guy that in that high 8,000 range, and I really haven't taken a big peek at ownership yet in terms of that one. That would be someone that I would be looking at in terms of ownership. Well, I'll pull up that spreadsheet here in a moment. Then you mentioned about Zach Reese and Cedric Dumas. Zach Reese, we know, prior to his last 3 fights, was a guy known with that first round. He's going to go out there and he's going to win the first round or not there. So Zach Reese to me is a guy, and I don't trust Cedric Dumas. I've known people that have been around him. I just think this is a Zach Reese play all day long. Just can't trust Dumas. I mean, the only thing I would say though is, even though all Dumas's wins in the UFC are via decision, it would not shock me at all if he just tries to go balls to the wall and he is 50,000 hunting in terms of this one. But to me, I like Zach Reese. I think, Zach Reese is the better fighter in terms of that one. Samuel, appreciate the super chat. We'll get to, he says, top leverage East Sour tier. And Pete can answer this. Yeah, Pete will definitely get into Discord and let you know his thoughts on this matchups as well, to get his thoughts in terms of that, because he's got some things going on outside of the mixed martial arts community. Casa and 𝗵𝗂 making his UFC debut. He is someone that I'm familiar with. When I was doing fighter interviews, he was a guy that interviewed probably on 3 or 4 occasions. Comes out of that Fury FC system in Texas. And I know me and Pete have talked about this, over the whole time of us doing a show. When you look at regional promotions and that are putting in top talent into the UFC, Fury FC is one of those promotions that's going in there. Costa, inactivity, we've not seen him since May of last year. And the thing that really sticks out to you about Costa is, he's 2-2 in the UFC. Yes, those 2 wins will be TKO KO, but the losses, it's against the top of the division, Amir Albazi and Steve Erceg, 𝐿𝐸 𝐵𝐻 and Rendon. Elise, 19 years old. When I was doing my prep for this card, and Tapology is the place that I start with in terms of just collecting data on fighters. And the one thing that is not good when you look at her Tapology is that 2 of her fights have been flagged based on the promotion that it's in, and basically essentially questioning the legitimacy of the fights, of just basically it's just being a showcase matchup in there. And of course, Rendon, we've not seen her in over a year as well, over a year and a half, for the last fight being in March of 2024. Then, of course, the opening fight of the night is actually going to be a matchup that's supposed to take place last month at UFC 319, the tough finale in terms of that one. So I do want to get into the questions before I start to wrap up this episode. Samuel, as I mentioned, I really do appreciate when you talk about the salary range here, and I want to pull up the ownership figures in terms of this one. As we scroll on over here to the projections, let me pull up the ownership that's over here. We'll throw this over here on my little side computer here so I can kind of see here. When you look at the projections and ownership, I mean, the one thing that, and by the way, this is really the first time me looking at ownership here. Understand why Castro doesn't have the ownership, because that price tag, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of surprised Tatiana Suarez's ownership's not a little higher than what it currently lists at there. I would expect the Gastelum ownership is not going to be as high as it's currently projected, and no surprise that Silva and Lopez is going to be a highly owned matchup in terms of that one. But when you look at the salaries here, so looking at the 9,000 range, so we got Casa, Suarez, Todorovic, Silva, Gordon, and Gastelum. Like, to me, it starts off with it starts off with, when you talk about ownership in the 9,000 range, as the dog's going a little crazy in the background, to me, it is 𝐷𝐿𝐴 and Suarez would be my number 1 and number 2 options in terms of that one. And they are going to be the high owned fighters in that range. As you look at, Suarez, we talked about that takedown upside, Gian Silva, 5-round upside. And I think it's a matchup that likely just sits there and plays out on the feet. If it does go all 5 rounds, but I would expect it goes all 5 rounds. So they're to me, they're the clear number 1 and number 2 in this division in here. I would then probably go Gordon 3, Costa 4, and then it's 5A, 5B with Dusko and Gastelum. To me, because of the weight miss for Kelvin Gastelum, that scares the crap out of me. It just scares missing weight by 5 pounds. Just kind of makes you wonder what's going on there. And just because we know the history of Kelvin Gastelum of going the distance. So to me, I don't really trust going with Kelvin Gastelum in terms of that one. Now, when we look in the 8,000 range, I mentioned about Zach Reese, and look, it's as much of a play of betting against Cedric Dumas than anything else in terms of that one there. We look at some of the other ones. The Elyse Pereira at 8,600. I want to see her do it at this level, and I just think some quite and kind of like what I mentioned with Santiago Luna, who's at 8,300, is, are they getting to the UFC a little bit too early in terms of that one? That to me would stick out there. I think when you're looking at from a leverage perspective, by the way, let me just do a leverage perspective in terms of, I didn't really mention the 9,000 range. To me, Kelvin Gastelum is definitely going to be that leverage spot in the 7,000 range, in the 9,000 range. But I just have a little bit of concerns there. When you look in the 8,000 range, Rob Font is, and I'll say this, the Font Martinez matchup could be that leverage play fight of this fight card. If you're looking to get that leverage play, that to me, I think you look at both of those guys in the 8,000 range and the 7,000 range. Another one I will say this, I'm a little surprised how high the ownership is on Diego and Alexander. I'm surprised to see the ownership as high as it is in terms of that one there. And not really a surprise, just kind of as I'm just kind of going down the ownership overall in terms of this one. I would say this, in terms of the punt plays, I would rather go at Medina than over Lemos, just because I don't think Lemos is going to be able to stop the takedown. But where Medina, it's just, you don't trust either one of those fighters in that matchup there. Aiden Cora is also another, could be a very interesting play with at 10% ownership there. The female matchup between Elise and Rendon is something to potentially look at. I think the question is we haven't seen Rendon over a year. If she's really able to test the grappling of Elise in terms of that one there. In the 7,000 range, I think that 𝗏𝗲 Garcia may be an interesting play. And let me just pull, and he's got nice low ownership, so that's someone you could definitely look at in terms of that one. Let me, I know there were some questions that were put into the chat, so let me put these in here. First off, I know value plays under 8K and a core 3 on DraftKings. Now, when we look at value plays underneath 8K, I think Quang Le at 7,900 is going to be a value play I would look at. Rendon at 7,600, especially she able to get that grappling going. And then I mentioned about 𝗏𝗲 Garcia. Diego Lopez at 7,000 is going to be very interesting. And if that fight does go 25 minutes, very well, he could be optimal even in a loss, getting you, especially with what that price tag is going to be. A core 3 for me. So to me, it's Silva, it's Suarez, and the third one, if I'm looking to kind of save some money, I'd probably look at Quang Le at 7,900 as a core 3 for all of those there. Sam's got his usual question. Best top plays, Gian Silva and Tatiana Suarez. They're my top plays for me. I would throw Zach Reese in there as well. Live dogs. In terms of the live dogs, Quang Le, who's at plus 115. He is someone that I would look at as a plus live dog. Rendon, I would also put in that equation. She's plus 125. Betting underdog. Other ones that I would look at, you might want to see where the Hernandez and Diego Ferreira line goes. If you can get plus money on either one of those guys right now, they're both at minus 110. in terms of that one. Then let's see. The next question is best decision odds fighters. Now you look at the best decision odds. I mean, I think the co-main event's going the distance between Rob Font and Dave Martinez. I like Font to win via decision there, and he's at plus 130 to win via decision. I think that's one to stick there. The decision odds are not great on Gordon and Rafa Garcia. Jared Gordon win via decision minus 130, plus 425 for Rafa Garcia. I wouldn't mind maybe taking a little stab there at plus 425. Rafa Garcia to go out there and win by decision. Gastelum, just because of his history, I would sit there and look at him to win via decision at plus 155. Other ones I expect to go to decision, Rendon and Elise, I would expect that to go to decision. And then the other ones would be Gurriel and Aguilar would be a fight that has a high odds to go to the decision. Top inside the distance fighters. Even though he could very well go to decision, I think Jared Gordon, just because of what he's done in his past couple of fights, I would throw him in there in terms of that one. Todorovic, Medina, I think either one of those guys, whoever wins that matchup, I expect will win. Inside the distance. I would look at Suarez to win in the distance as well in terms of that one. So, as the dog's going a little crazy in the background. Zacharias inside the distance would be another one that I would look at in terms of that one. Top pump plays. For me, it's Jose Daniel Medina would be my top pump play at 6,900, but it's a very boom bust play. And look, don't mind going the Diego Lopez route in terms of a pump play there. Favorite parlays. So I really haven't put together my betting sheet yet. That's something I'll be doing tonight. I would probably put Gian Silva. And one of the things that I don't know if maybe you like to do this, is something I like to do, where I might find a college football line that I like and then pairing it up with a UFC fighter in terms of there. But like, if I was going to put together a 3-fighter parlay, I would go Silva at minus 260. I would take the minus 110 on Rob Font. And then the other one, I'd probably just go Zacharias at minus 250. I feel like that would be, be very, low plus money, but that'd be a 3-fighter parlay. I would look to go there. Jason and Pete specials. Of course, Pete's the 8,000 fighter. Doncheko is the favorite in the opening matchup. That's a tough finale. I think he's going to get the job done there in terms of top captain MVPs. Suarez, Silva. They would be my top two in terms of that one. Would favor Tatiana Suarez more than Gian Silva in that one. Road to Match Series over under 6.5. Man, after what we've seen the last week and a half, I'll say over 6.5 in terms of that one there. Of course, if you want to jump into our Discord, you can do that. I know some people talk about some of the other fights going on. Notable fight tonight, LFA, Gable Stevenson making his MMA debut. That's something to sit there. Also, I believe it's today, Alexander Shlemenko, the former Bellator middleweight champion, having his 87th professional fight. Just absolutely nuts. 87 fights in terms of that one. But as always, I do appreciate everyone who tunes in for every episode of the Fight HQ podcast. Hopefully myself and Pete can get together next week to talk about everything going on, get you ready for, as we're in this run of UFC events that are coming up here. So as always, appreciate everyone tuning in, and I'll talk to you on the next episode of the Fight HQ podcast.